It is miserably hot today in the low 90s. As you can see behind me, I've started in on looking at opening the dash or removing the dash to get at that steel hydraulic line that I mentioned is leaking. The whole reason that I purchased the service manual. Having gone through the service manual, it's good, but not necessarily going to be superb for this particular problem. It goes through all the details that you would ever need on the transmission, the clutch, the hydraulics, the engine, for full rebuild and all that. But with respect to actually opening or removing the dash, there's no details. There are details with respect to the steering gearbox, but only the manual steering gearbox. So the power steering gearbox that this machine has was apparently introduced in 1981 or so, near the end of the run. And while it shows up on the exploded view in the parts manual, there's no description of it in the service manual. So it turns out the parts manual is actually more useful in terms of opening the dash than the service manual, because the parts manual has pages that show the exploded view of the entire dash, as well as the throttle linkage and all of that. So let's go take a look at that. Here is the full exploded view of the dash panel itself. Now, this in and of itself is not all that revealing in terms of how to take it out, but with what I can see on the tractor and with the other things that I can see on the panel, it is helpful. Now, for what I need to do, I'm hoping that I don't need to disassemble any of these things. For example, you can see that strip there in the back. That's behind all the wiring and all the instrument in the dash panel, and I don't think that it impedes being able to do what I need to do with the dash panel. Now, the one thing that does impede doing what I need to do is the hand throttle. So the steering column and the hand throttle come out side by side right there. My goal is to be able to loosen the dash panel and slide it up the steering column enough that I can get at that steel hydraulic line. But in order to do that, I'm going to have to deal with the hand throttle, and I'll show you why here in just a sec. This is where the hand throttle control comes out down through the bottom of the dash. And so with the way that this comes through, you can't lift this sheet metal up and out of the way because of that throttle linkage. So that's actually the thing that I need to be able to loosen and undo. And if I do that, I should be able to slide the dash panel up the steering column and the hand throttle lever, which you see right there next to the steering column, enough to get some clearance around that steer hydraulic line and the steering box to hopefully do something about it. So if we go back to the manual, we can take a look and see what seems to hold this in. Here's the diagram of the hand throttle. As you can see here, in terms of these pieces, we've got the lever up top, it goes down through, and that right there is that control arm, at least I think, that is sticking out through the dash. So it looks to me like I either need to undo that bolt there or somehow undo this bracket so that things can slide up. And I think this here is going to be the trickiest part of this process, and it's why I wish that there was an explanation of how to do this, but hopefully I can figure it out. Aside from the hand throttle being in the way, this dash panel is held in place by just 3 bolts, but in this case only one of them's holding. There's the one right there up at the top, and then there are 2 others down at the bottom, and I'll show you that, and I'll show you how those are not holding anything. I'm now down on the left-hand side of the tractor. This right here at the left is the fuel tank. You can see that bolt head down there. That is the bolt that is otherwise holding the dash. But let me see if I can even get a view on this thing. If I wiggle this, you can actually see that there's actually nothing holding there. That grommet is completely worn out, and so this is able to just move around freely on that, and it's the same on the other side. In fact, I think that this can actually lift up and away because there's just nothing left there holding that together. So I'm going to undo the bolt at the top and we'll see how much flexibility we get. It turns out this takes an 11/16 inch wrench. So what I'm going to try to do is just loosen this carefully, because the last thing I want to do is drop that nut down in there and not be able to get it back. So let's see. That's coming. There's a lock washer behind it. All right. So we got the nut in the lock washer. And now we should have some wiggle. Yep, I can lift a good 1/4 inch. So now let's explore, see what I could see about what's binding. It is indeed binding on that throttle. Go ahead and show you. So if you can see, dark down here, that hand throttle is where things are binding up right there. So we'll go ahead and take a look and see what we can do about this. Having looked at this for a few minutes now, I think that the only way I'm going to be able to get into that dash enough to get my hand in there to do anything is going to be to loosen or remove the fuel tank. The fuel tank is held in by that rod going across the top. There's a bolt here on this side and a matching one on the other side. So I'm going to go ahead and loosen those and see if I can wiggle the fuel tank enough to get in there. And if not, I'll have to disconnect the return line, which we see up top, and then the fuel line down at the bottom. Fortunately, there's a shutoff valve that you see there. So I could shut off the fuel in the tank without having to drain the whole thing and just disconnect the line that goes to the injector pump. Of course, if I have to do that, I'll have to bleed the system when I put it back together or it won't run. So hopefully I don't have to do that. But let's loosen this up and see what we find. I was able to get the fuel tank shifted. If I fully removed it, I think this would be easier, but I really don't want to do that. The nut I need to get to is the double nut that you see right there. That is the bottom of the steering hand throttle shaft, as you can see. So if I undo those nuts, that lever that you see at the left that comes through the dash and the rod, the control rod itself, should be free. So I'm just going to have to get in there very carefully with a wrench and work those loose. But it's such a hot day that that's going to be it for today. I'll pick this up again another day. Hopefully it won't be so hot, or I'll be able to do this earlier in the day where it's not so miserable. It's a new day, but still warm. Getting an earlier start today. It's only in the low 80s now, headed for the 90s later. So hopefully I can wrap this up before then. Gonna go work on removing that hand throttle. It's got 11/16 inch nuts. Those double nuts are 11/16 inch, just like the nut up higher on the steering column. Gonna try and loosen those and pull that hand throttle up and out so that I can raise the dash to get at that steel line. I have successfully detached the hand throttle lever. Here's what came out. There were these two nuts on the end of the rod with this lock washer, and then above those, up against the mounting plate, was this part here, which in the parts manual is called a spring. What this does is provide the tension or the resistance so the hand throttle holds position. Otherwise, it springs back to the idle or off position at the injector pump. So that gives resistance to hold the throttle in place. So now that this is apart, we've got a little bit more play in the dash, so we can go look at that steel hydraulic line. Here you can see the free hand throttle, so that's completely loosened now. To actually get this undone, what I had to do is get a wrench on the bottom, and then I actually had to hold here and pull and work this, going this way, reset the wrench, work it again. So just going a fraction of a turn on the nut at a time. Took a while and was quite a bit of effort to have one hand below and one hand above, but it is free and we've got more room now to work around that steel line. Without taking things apart further via removing the fuel tank fully from the tractor to get at a couple more disconnection points of things behind the dash, this is as high up roughly as I can get it, And you can see right here on this steel line where the issue is. Right there, there's a nice kind of chip and groove from abrasion of the edge of this dash against that steel line. And that, from all indications, is where the leak is coming from. So I'm gonna head to the hardware store. This is gonna be a super Band-Aid fix that's likely still gonna leak. I'm gonna try and get some rubber tubing and hose clamps and just kind of wrap over that to try and seal it up a little and slow that leak down. So it's a temporary Band-Aid solution, but hopefully it'll get me through the year. This is a 1/4 inch OD steel line, or at least very close to a 1/4 inch, so I'm gonna try and find a 1/4 inch ID tubing. I picked up these hose clamps and this vinyl tubing, which is a 1/4 inch ID. I'm actually gonna slice this tubing lengthwise so that I can slip it around that steel hydraulic line and then clamp it up. Again, not gonna be tight, but the idea is just to slow that leak down so that it's not losing so much fluid when the tractor's operating. Using a screwdriver, I was able to move the steel hydraulic line away from the transmission housing, and then I was able to slip the slit vinyl tubing up over that gouge in the steel line. So the next step is just getting those hose clamps on there to tighten it up. The 2 hose clamps are now in place around that vinyl tube. Go ahead and pull this screwdriver out, let things settle back, and next we'll put the dash back in place, reversing the procedure to take it apart. So hand throttle back together first and then bolting it up top. All right, everything is now buttoned back up. You can see one of the hose clamps and the end of the vinyl tube there. What's nice about this is the hose clamp now actually cushions or protects that hydraulic line from the edge of the dash. So it's time to fire it up, take her out, do a little work, and see how we fare. It is still leaking, but at least it's slowed down to a more reasonable rate. Feeling okay about running this tractor and doing the work that needs to be done in the coming days with this like this. And then at the end of the season, that's when I could spend some more time addressing this better.